All right, so are you ready to dive into some biotech?
Always.
Today, we're looking at Viking Therapeutics,
Okay.
trying to figure out if their stock is a good buy in 2025.
Interesting.
We've got an article here from The Motley Fool, and it's painting a pretty rosy picture. The stock grew 116% last year,
Wow.
but
You need to look a little deeper, right?
That's what
To give our listener, the best information.
absolutely. I mean, you can't just look at past performance, right? You got to understand what's driving that growth.
Right.
Is it sustainable?
Exactly. So first, we need to understand the market Viking Therapeutics is playing in, which is the obesity drug market.
Right.
And this market it's exploding.
Yeah, it is. Like projections are saying it could be worth over $100 billion
Wow.
by 2030.
That's a lot of money.
Yeah, I mean, it really shows that we're seeing a big shift in how we're thinking about weight loss, right? It's not just diet and exercise anymore.
What's driving this massive growth? Well, I think a big part of it is the success of some of these new drugs.
Right.
Like, you've got Eli Lilly's Mounjaro and Novo Nordisk's Wegovy.
Okay.
These are, they're called GLP-1 receptor agonists.
Okay.
Essentially what they do is they mimic hormones that regulate appetite and blood sugar.
So they're helping people lose weight by sort of controlling their hunger
Yeah,
and how their body processes sugar.
exactly.
Yeah.
And they've been shown to be, like, really effective and safe, which has just made them super popular. Like, there have even been supply shortages
Oh, wow.
because demand is so high.
So it sounds like Viking Therapeutics is, hoping to sort of ride this wave, ride the success with their own drug.
Yeah.
VK2735, is that right?
That's right, yeah. VK273D5. And it's also a GLP-1 receptor agonist,
Okay.
similar to Mounjaro.
Okay.
But here's where things get interesting with Viking. They're developing both an injectable and an oral version.
Oh, so having those two options could be
Yeah.
a big advantage.
Yeah, for sure.
What have the trials shown so far?
Well, the phase 2 results for the injectable were really pretty impressive. Like, participants saw up to 14.7% weight loss in just 13 weeks.
Wow, that's a lot.
Yeah. And even the oral version, which is earlier in development, showed up to 8.2% weight loss in 28 days.
Those are some really promising numbers. No wonder their stock jumped. I think it was over 120%.
Yeah, something like that.
In a single day after those results were announced.
It definitely got people's attention.
Yeah.
But, it's not all sunshine and roses, right? They're not playing in a sandbox.
Right.
They're going up against some really big companies.
Right. You're talking about Eli Lilly
That's
and
exactly.
Novo Nordisk. I mean, these are huge companies.
Giants. Huge.
Yeah.
Like massive resources, enormous market caps. I think, Eli Lilly is over 300 billion, and then Novo Nordisk is over 600 billion.
And then you compare that to Viking Therapeutics, which has a market cap of under $4 billion. So that's a big difference.
It is.
So can Viking Therapeutics actually compete with these behemoths?
Well, that's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
I mean, going head-to-head with them, that's a tough battle.
Yeah.
It'd be like David and Goliath, right?
Right. Yeah.
But I think and this is important for our listener to remember,
Yeah.
there's probably room for multiple winners in this market.
Okay.
It's growing so fast,
Yeah.
so they don't necessarily have to be number one to be a successful investment.
That's a good point. So even if they don't sort of dethrone the giants, they could still carve out a profitable
Absolutely.
niche for themselves.
For sure. And, there are a couple of things that I think could work in their favor.
Okay.
I think, for one, they have that dual approach,
Yeah.
right, with both the injectable and the oral.
Yeah.
I think that could give them an edge, in terms of patient preference.
Right.
And then also just accessibility.
Yeah.
So that's a big plus for them.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense. But what about the potential downsides? I mean, developing and launching a new drug is no easy feat.
Oh, absolutely not.
Yeah.
No, there are definitely some challenges.
Right.
For one, they're going to need to secure patent protection, right,
Okay.
to prevent generic competition
Right. Yeah.
from basically eating their lunch, right?
And then scaling up production to meet, the potential demand could also be a challenge.
Oh, yeah, especially with all the supply chain issues we've seen lately.
Right.
Manufacturing capacity is going to be key. And then, of course, you've got regulatory approvals, right?
Yeah.
FDA, that whole process can be really time-consuming, really expensive.
So it sounds like Viking Therapeutics is facing, some serious challenges despite, the promising early results for their drug.
Yeah.
But the rewards could be huge if they overcome these obstacles and kind of gain a place for themselves in this market.
I think that's a great way to put it. It's a classic high-risk, high-reward scenario. And I think to figure out if it's a risk worth taking, we need to take a look at what's coming up for Viking in 2025.
Yeah. All right, so let's kind of shift gears and focus on what to watch for this year. What events or milestones could impact Viking's stock price? Could make it go up or down?
Well, I think the big one is going to be the continued progress of VK2735 through these clinical trials.
Right.
We're expecting to see data from phase 3 trials for the injectable version sometime this year, and those results I think are going to be really crucial.
So you're saying that if this phase 3 data is positive, we could see another massive jump like we saw after those phase 2 results?
It's possible. I mean, I think a positive phase 3 data would really validate the drug, prove its effectiveness, its safety, and it could really pave the way for FDA approval.
So that's something to watch closely. What else should we be paying attention to in 2025?
Well, besides just the clinical trial data, it's also important to keep an eye on the competitive landscape, right? I mean, remember, Eli Lilly and Novo Nordisk, they're not just sitting around.
Right.
They're working on new things all the time.
So Viking has to kind of stay ahead of the curve if they want to remain competitive.
Stay innovative.
What are some other potential challenges or risks that could emerge this year?
Well, one thing to consider is the possibility of unexpected side effects coming out of these trials. I mean, the phase 2 data looked good.
Right.
But sometimes when you do larger trials, things pop up that you didn't see before.
That's a good point. And then, the FDA could also, change their...
Oh, absolutely. Regulatory uncertainty. It's always a risk factor in biotech.
And then, of course, there's the broader economic climate.
Yeah.
A recession could hurt their ability to raise capital.
For sure.
So there are a lot of moving parts
to consider here. It's not just how well their drug performs in trials.
Yeah.
We also have to factor in, how competitive the landscape is, regulations, and the economy.
You got it. It's a complex equation with a lot of variables, and that's why it's so important to be really clear-eyed about both the potential rewards and the risks.
So we've kind of painted the picture of what Viking Therapeutics is facing in 2025. They've got this promising drug, but they also have some serious competition.
Yeah.
A number of potential hurdles.
For sure.
But here's the question I keep coming back to.
Yeah.
Is all of this worth it for our listener? Is Viking Therapeutics a smart buy in 2025?
Well, I think to get to the bottom of that, we need to dive into their financials a little bit more.
Okay.
Look at how their stock is valued, and then maybe even explore some potential scenarios that could play out this year. So maybe we can get a better sense of, the likelihood of success. Sounds good. We'll be back after a short break to continue our deep dive into Viking Therapeutics. Stay tuned.
All right.
Okay, so we're back and ready to kind of get into the nitty-gritty with Viking Therapeutics.
All right.
Before the break, we talked about the potential upsides and some of the challenges.
Yeah.
But to really make a good decision about whether this is a good investment, we got to look at the numbers.
Absolutely. Got to understand the financials. Right?
Yeah.
And how the stock is valued.
Right. So let's talk money. What are the financial projections looking like for Viking?
Yeah.
I mean, they're not profitable yet, right?
Not yet, no. Like a lot of biotech companies that are still in the development phase, they're spending a lot of cash on research, clinical trials, all of that. But analysts are projecting that, if VK2735 is approved, by the FDA and sales go well, they could actually be profitable within the next few years.
So their profitability is really tied to the success of this drug. That's a lot of pressure.
It is.
Yeah.
But, I mean, that's kind of how it is with biotech, right?
Right.
You're betting on a specific product or technology, high risk, high reward.
Exactly. So what about their current financial situation? Do they have enough cash on hand to even get through all this?
Well, that's a really important question, right? Because developing a drug and getting it launched is really expensive. Looking at their latest financial statements, they do have a decent chunk of cash.
Okay.
But it's pretty likely that they're going to need to raise more money.
Okay. How do they do that?
Well, a couple of ways. They could take on some debt, or they could issue more stock.
And that could dilute the value of the shares.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a bit of a balancing act.
Right.
They need enough money to operate, but they also want to, try to protect their shareholders. as much as possible.
Okay, so we've got the financial picture. Let's talk about the people running the show. What about their management team?
Oh, this is key, right? I mean, a company is only as good as its leadership.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is an area where Viking actually scores pretty well.
Okay.
Their CEO, he's got a really good track record.
Okay.
In the biotech industry. He's successfully developed and launched other drugs.
So experience is on their side.
Yeah, definitely. And then the rest of the management team, they've got expertise in all the key areas.
Okay.
Drug development, regulatory stuff, commercialization.
Yeah, right.
And they seem to have like a really solid plan for how they're going to get this drug out there to the market.
Right. It's one thing to have a good drug, but it's a whole other thing to actually get it out there.
Absolutely, yeah. Execution is so important in this industry, and having a good management team can make all the difference.
Okay, so we've talked about their financials, their leadership. Now, let's put on our prediction hats. What are some scenarios, good, bad, ugly, that could happen with Viking in 2025?
Yeah, let's speculate a little bit.
Yeah.
So, scenario number one, the dream scenario for Viking and their investors.
Okay.
Phase 3 data comes back, and it is amazing.
Okay.
Right. It's super positive. The FDA approves the drug quickly. The launch is smooth, and then boom, they just capture this big chunk of the market.
That's the best case scenario.
Yeah, that's everyone's hoping for.
Right.
And the stock price. Through the roof.
Okay, but let's be realistic. There are
of course.
other possible outcomes.
Right. So let's say the phase 3 data is positive, but maybe not as amazing.
Okay.
Maybe the drug works, but it has some mild side effects, or it's not that much better than what's already out there.
Yeah.
In that case, the FDA approval might take longer, and it might be harder to get market share.
Right.
So the stock price probably goes up.
Yeah.
But maybe not, as dramatically.
Okay, so that's kind of a more moderate scenario. What about the worst case scenario?
Well, the worst case scenario is that the phase 3 trials just fail. I mean, that's the nightmare for any biotech company.
Yeah.
The data shows that the drug isn't effective or that it's not safe.
Right.
The FDA rejects it, and then Viking has to start over.
And the stock price?
Yeah, it would plummet. It would be a big hit.
So a lot is riding on these phase 3 results.
Big time. And that's why biotech is so risky. Clinical trials can make or break a company.
So how do we look at all this information and actually decide if this is a good investment for our listener?
Well, there's no magic formula.
Right.
It really depends on, how much risk you're willing to take, what your investment goals are,
right,
and how likely you think each of these scenarios is.
So it's more than just the numbers.
Yeah, it's about your gut feeling, your intuition as well. I mean, investing is as much an art as it is a science. You got to look at the data, but you also have to consider those less tangible factors.
Okay, so let's try to kind of sum this all up for our listener. We've looked at Viking's potential, the challenges, their financials, their leadership, and even some scenarios. What's the bottom line? Do you think this is a good buy?
That's the big question, right? And honestly, there's no one right answer. It really comes down to, what the individual investor is comfortable with.
Okay, but you've been analyzing this company pretty closely. What's your gut feeling? What are your thoughts?
Honestly, I'm cautiously optimistic. I do think they have a really promising drug. Their management team seems really strong.
Right.
But there are also some big risks involved.
So a bit of a gamble.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. It's a gamble, but with potentially big rewards.
Okay, so we've given our listener a lot to chew on.
Yeah.
But before we wrap up, I want to come back to something we talked about earlier.
Okay.
This whole obesity drug market. Yeah.
It's not just about stock prices and profits.
Right.
There's some bigger ethical and societal questions here.
Absolutely. This is a really fascinating topic. I mean, how do these new weight loss drugs impact our society, our healthcare system, and how we think about weight and body image?
For example, are these drugs going to be available to everyone?
Yeah.
Regardless of, their income or their insurance?
Yeah.
Or are they going to be something that only the wealthy can afford?
That's a really important question. I mean, we've seen this happen with other new drugs.
And what about the psychological effects? Will these drugs kind of change how we think about body image and weight stigma?
These are really big questions. Yeah. And I think it's so important that we talk about them openly and honestly.
So we've been really focused on Viking Therapeutics here, but it's important to remember that this is just part of a much bigger story. Yeah. The development and the use of these drugs has implications way beyond just, the financials.
Okay, so I think it's time to wrap up this part of our deep dive.
Right.
We've looked at Viking Therapeutics pretty closely. I hope our listener feels like they have enough information to make a good decision. But I do want to leave our listener with one final thought to kind of, ponder.
Oh, I love those. What is it?
We spent a lot of time talking about, Viking Therapeutics and their stock.
Yeah.
But I think it's important to zoom out and think about this whole obesity drug market. How do you think it's going to change our society in the years to come?
Wow, that's a really good question. I mean, it's something that we all need to be thinking about. It's going to have a big impact.
And on that note, we'll leave you to think about that. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into Viking Therapeutics.
Yeah, thanks for listening.
We're back, and man, this deep dive has been a journey, hasn't it?
It has.
We started with this question, should you buy stock in Viking Therapeutics in 2025? Right.
And wow, we have just uncovered so many different things to think about.
It really shows you, how connected everything is.
Exactly.
One company can be a small example of a much bigger trend. And here, Viking's future is tied to this whole obesity drug market.
Which, like we said, is going to be huge in the next few years.
Absolutely. It's going to keep growing.
So much opportunity, but also challenges. Not just for Viking, but for everyone.
Right, exactly. For society as a whole.
Okay, so let's take a minute to recap what we've learned about Viking Therapeutics.
Okay.
What are the big takeaways for our listener?
Well, I think the first thing is they have this really promising drug, VK2735.
Right.
It's done well in the trials so far.
Yeah.
And having both the injectable and the oral versions, that's a smart move.
Yeah, it gives them options to appeal to more people.
Exactly. But we got to remember, they're up against some giants in this industry.
Right. Eli Lilly.
Yeah, Eli Lilly, Novo Nordisk.
They're huge. They have way more resources. They've got the market share already. So Viking has to, really execute well.
Right.
Get through those regulatory hurdles, figure out manufacturing, protect their patents.
Yeah, there's a lot they need to do. Right.
A lot of challenges.
And biotech is just risky in general.
Oh, yeah, always. Trials can fail.
Yeah.
The market can change overnight.
So it's high risk, but high reward. Right.
Potentially.
Yeah.
But that's the big question for each investor, right?
Yeah.
Is it worth it?
Okay, so we've kind of summarized everything about Viking, but I want to end this deep dive by thinking a little bit bigger.
Okay, yeah, I like that.
We've been so focused on Viking and this drug.
Yeah.
But this whole obesity drug market, it's going to have such a big impact on the world.
It is.
So here's what I want our listener to think about. How is this going to change things, in the next few years?
Wow, that's a big question.
How will it affect our society, our healthcare, how we see ourselves in our bodies?
It really makes you think.
Will everyone have access to these drugs? Or will it just be the wealthy? Will we become more accepting of different bodies?
Yeah, good point.
Or will there be even more pressure to look a certain way?
And what about unexpected consequences?
Yeah, there could be new kinds of stigma or discrimination.
People might feel pressured to take these drugs even if they don't need them.
So many questions. We need to be having these conversations.
We do. It can't just be about the science.
Yeah.
It's about people.
This is a great example of how, even when there's exciting new science, we have to be thoughtful.
For sure.
About the impact it could have.
Think about the consequences.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, we encourage our listener to think not just about Viking Therapeutics, but about this whole revolution in how we treat obesity.
The big deal.
It's a big deal. And with that, thanks for joining us on the deep dive.
Thanks for listening, everyone.